Rain hammered against the black SUVs as they tore through the empty streets of Milan just after midnight. Inside the lead vehicle, every man wore silence like another weapon. The order had been simple. Kidnap Isabella Moretti, daughter of the city's most powerful judge. She was supposed to become leverage in a war that had already swallowed hundreds of lives. Failure wasn't an option. The convoy screeched to a halt outside an abandoned railway station where a lone woman stepped from a taxi, dragging an old suitcase behind her. She wore a gray coat several sizes too large, her dark hair tied into a loose braid, and thick glasses had tired eyes that had clearly forgotten what sleep felt like. The surveillance photos matched. Height, hair, build, everything. Before she could react, gloved hands covered her mouth. The suitcase crashed onto the wet pavement. She fought with surprising strength, but seconds later she disappeared into the waiting SUV. The convoy vanished into the darkness. No one noticed that the taxi driver kept shouting one sentence into the rain. "That's not Isabella." An hour later, inside the heavily guarded Castello de Lucca, the kidnapped woman woke with her wrists tied to a wooden chair beneath a chandelier that looked as if it belonged in a royal palace instead of a criminal fortress. The room was silent except for slow footsteps. Every guard immediately lowered his head. He had arrived. Luca de Lucca, Europe's most feared mafia king. At 36, his name alone could collapse governments, erase fortunes, and end bloodlines. He had built an empire that stretched from shipping ports to private banks, yet he trusted almost no one. His expression never changed. Neither did his heartbeat. Fear was simply something other people experienced. He stopped in front of the prisoner. She stared back, not with arrogance, not with terror, with confusion. "You've made a mistake," she whispered. Luca studied her face. Something felt wrong. The surveillance photographs had shown expensive jewelry. This woman wore none. The judge's daughter was famous for designer handbags. This woman's purse looked years old. Her hands weren't manicured. They were rough. Tiny scars crossed her fingers. The kind earned through years of hard work. "What is your name?" She hesitated, then answered quietly, "Emma Russi." The room became perfectly still. One of Luca's captains frowned. "She's lying." Emma slowly shook her head. "I clean apartments. I work nights. I was coming home." Luca looked toward his intelligence chief. The man avoided eye contact. An uncomfortable realization spread across the room. Someone had made a catastrophic mistake. Across the city, Judge Moretti sat safely inside his mansion. His real daughter, Isabella, had never left home. She had canceled her evening plans hours earlier. The rival Mafia family immediately learned the kidnapping had failed. Within minutes, they understood something even more valuable. Luca de Lucca had accidentally kidnapped an innocent civilian. A weakness. For the first time in years, the untouchable king had made an error. Back inside the castle, Luca ordered Emma's background investigated. The report returned within 20 minutes. Every page made less sense than the last. Age, 28. Occupation, cleaner. Part-time volunteer at a children's hospital. No criminal record. No wealthy relatives. No political connections. No hidden identity. No secret fortune. Just debt, medical bills, 2 jobs, and one younger brother recovering from heart surgery. She had absolutely no value in a mafia war. His captains demanded the obvious. Kill her. No witnesses. Clean the mistake. Luca remained silent. Emma heard every word. Her breathing became uneven, but tears never came. She simply looked down at the floor, not because she accepted death, because she had spent years surviving problems no one else could see. This was merely the worst one. Finally she spoke. "If you're going to kill me..." Every guard watched her. "Please leave my brother out of this." No begging, no screaming, no promises. Just one request. For someone else. Something about that answer unsettled Luca. Most people fought to save themselves. She thought only of family. Meanwhile, someone inside Luca's organization quietly sent a message. The boss kidnapped the wrong woman. The message reached the Romano syndicate before sunrise. Its leader smiled. This mistake will destroy him. Orders spread across Europe. Assassins moved. Corrupt politicians changed sides. Bank accounts disappeared overnight. Every enemy Luca had ever made suddenly sensed blood in the water. One kidnapping had become the spark for an international mafia war. Emma was moved to a private room instead of an execution chamber. The decision shocked everyone. Even Luca wasn't entirely sure why he had changed his mind. Perhaps it was strategy, perhaps curiosity, or perhaps those tired eyes reminded him of a version of himself buried decades beneath violence and power. He instructed the guards, "No one harms her." The order spread quickly. Some obeyed. Others quietly questioned whether their ruthless king was beginning to lose the cold judgment that had made him untouchable. They didn't realize someone inside the castle had already decided Emma would never leave alive. Not because she knew too much, but because keeping her alive threatened plans years in the making. Late that night, Emma awoke to the faint sound of a key turning in her locked door. A shadow slipped silently into the room, holding a suppressed pistol. The figure whispered only 4 words. "The boss can't save you." The weapon slowly rose toward her chest. Who wanted the innocent woman dead more than the mafia boss who had kidnapped her? The silenced pistol steadied. Emma froze, every instinct screaming for her to run despite having nowhere to go. The masked figure took one slow step closer, the suppressor aimed directly at her heart. Outside the bedroom door, the hallway remained eerily quiet. Whoever had sent this assassin knew exactly when the guards changed shifts. The trigger began to tighten. A single shot shattered the silence, not from the assassin's weapon, but from the hallway. The heavy wooden door exploded inward. Luca de Luca entered like a storm. His bodyguard crashed into the masked intruder, sending both men across the polished marble floor. The assassin recovered with frightening speed, slashing a hidden knife across the bodyguard's shoulder before diving through the shattered window into the darkness below. By the time Luca reached the balcony, the killer had disappeared into the surrounding forest. Only silence remained. Someone inside his own fortress had opened the door. Someone inside his empire wanted Emma dead. That realization chilled him far more than the failed assassination. For years, betrayal had been something he inflicted on others, not something that reached his own bedroom corridors. He turned toward Emma. She sat trembling against the headboard, yet even now her first words weren't about herself. "Is your God alive?" Lucas stared at her. Most people, after nearly being murdered, would ask if they were safe. Emma worried about the wounded man bleeding across the floor. Something about her continued to refuse the rules of his world. By sunrise, every member of Luca's inner circle gathered around the massive oak table in the castle's war room. Maps covered the walls. Digital screens displayed shipping routes, private airports, offshore accounts, and surveillance feed from across Europe. No one spoke until Luca entered. His expression was colder than usual. "There's a traitor." The room remained silent. The assassin entered through 3 secured checkpoints. Only trusted men possessed those access codes. Luca slowly looked around the table. Every face belonged to someone who had fought beside him for years. Every one of them was now a suspect. If I discover who helped him... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Everyone knew what happened to traitors. Across the city, the Romano syndicate celebrated. Their leader, Vittorio Romano, studied photographs of Emma. "So she's nobody." One advisor nodded. "A cleaner. Broke. Ordinary." Vittorio smiled. "No." He placed the photo on the table. "She's exactly somebody." His men looked confused. The moment Lucas spared an innocent woman. He tapped the photograph. He showed the world he still has a conscience. That was far more dangerous than any weapon. Empires built on fear could not afford compassion. Vittorio understood psychology better than bullets. He didn't need Emma dead. He needed her alive long enough to expose Luca's weakness. Then the entire underworld would question whether their ruthless king had become sentimental. In organized crime, perception often killed faster than guns. Inside the castle, Emma was no longer treated like a prisoner. She remained under constant guard, but the chains disappeared. Fresh clothes arrived. Proper meals. Medical attention for bruises suffered during the kidnapping. None of it made sense. She wandered onto a balcony overlooking acres of vineyards and ancient stone walls. It looked beautiful. It also looked impossible to escape. Behind her, Luca appeared without warning. "You should hate me." She nodded. "I probably should." His eyes narrowed. "Probably." Emma looked toward the sunrise. "I've spent years being angry." She spoke softly, almost to herself. It never fixed anything. Those words landed harder than accusations. Luca had built an empire powered entirely by anger. Revenge had become his religion. Power had become his prayer. Yet standing beside him was a woman who possessed neither wealth nor influence, and somehow carried more peace than anyone he had ever met. Later that afternoon, Emma noticed an elderly kitchen employee struggling to carry heavy boxes. Without hesitation, she helped, then another worker, then another. By evening, nearly everyone in the castle had spoken to her. She remembered names. She thanked cooks. She helped bandage the injured bodyguard who had protected her. No one ordered her to. She simply did. The servants began smiling again, something that hadn't happened in years. Even hardened guards found themselves lowering their voices around her. News traveled quickly through the fortress. The prisoner thanked the kitchen staff. The prisoner cleaned the infirmary. The prisoner spent an hour reading to the gardener's granddaughter while her father worked. Tiny acts, almost invisible, yet they spread faster than fear. Luca noticed. His empire had always functioned through obedience. Emma inspired something completely different. Loyalty. That evening, Luca reviewed financial reports worth hundreds of millions of euros. Numbers no longer held his attention. Instead, he remembered Emma asking whether his wounded guard had survived. He remembered servants laughing for the first time in months. He remembered her quietly folding blankets in the medical wing as though kindness required no audience. It irritated him. He couldn't understand why. Power came from intimidation, not compassion. Yet every statistic inside his own castle suggested otherwise. Productivity improved. Arguments decreased. Security staff voluntarily extended shifts. No threats had been issued. Emma had accomplished in 2 days what years of fear never had. The peace shattered shortly before midnight. An explosion rocked one of Luca's shipping ports. Minutes later, another report arrived. 3 warehouses burned simultaneously. A convoy transporting cash disappeared without a trace. Then another message. 2 trusted captains had switched allegiance to Vittorio Romano. Billions in assets suddenly stood exposed. The war had officially begun. Luca's generals demanded immediate retaliation. Bomb the Romanos. Assassinate politicians. Burn every business connected to them. The old Luca would have agreed without hesitation. Instead, he hesitated, long enough for everyone in the room to notice. Emma watched ambulances arrive carrying wounded guards. She ignored repeated orders to stay inside. Instead, she moved from patient to patient, bringing water, helping doctors, comforting frightened young recruits who had never expected war to become this real. One barely 20 years old whispered through tears that he had failed as commander. Emma squeezed his hand. "No," she said quietly. "You survived. Sometimes that's the bravest victory." Luca witnessed a moment from across the room. The young soldier, moments earlier consumed by shame, managed a weak smile. Luca couldn't remember the last time anyone had smiled inside one of his medical facilities. Hours later, his oldest advisor approached cautiously. "You are changing." Luca kept looking through the hospital window. "No, you spared an innocent." Silence. "You delayed revenge." Silence. "You built this empire through fear." Another pause. The advisor finally whispered a question no one else dared ask. "What if fear isn't enough anymore?" Before Luca could answer, alarms erupted across the castle. Red emergency lights flooded every hallway. Security monitors suddenly went black. Power failed. One horrifying message echoed through every emergency radio. "The Romano Syndicate has breached the outer walls, and they are coming for Emma." The castle plunged into darkness. Only the crimson glow of emergency lights cut through the stone corridors as alarms echoed from every direction. Guards rushed toward the outer walls while explosions shook the ancient fortress. Windows burst inward. Smoke rolled through the halls. The Romano Syndicate had not come to seize territory. They had come for one woman. Luca reached the security command room, only to find every monitor black. His communications chief struggled to restore the cameras while reports poured in over crackling radios. East Gate breached. Snipers on the southern ridge. 3 internal checkpoints compromised. The attack was too coordinated to be spontaneous. Someone inside the Empire had once again fed information to the enemy. Luca's greatest fear had become reality. The war wasn't outside his walls. It was already inside them. Emma stood in the infirmary, helping doctors move wounded men into safer rooms. One of the nurses grabbed her arm. "You have to hide." Emma looked around at the injured soldiers, many barely old enough to shave. "If I leave," she said quietly, "who helps them?" She tore clean sheets into bandages and continued working while gunfire echoed through the corridors. A frightened young recruit tried to stand despite a wound in his shoulder. She gently pushed him back onto the bed. "You don't prove courage by dying. You prove it by surviving." The young man slowly nodded. Nearby, several guards exchanged glances. None of them had ever heard anyone speak to them like that. Not with commands, not with fear, with compassion. Meanwhile, Vittorio Romano walked through the burning courtyard surrounded by heavily armed mercenaries. He smiled as flames climbed the castle walls. "This empire is already falling," he said. "It simply hasn't realized it yet." His plan had never depended on military strength alone. He had poisoned Luca's organization with suspicion, forced loyal men to doubt one another, made every commander wonder who would betray them next. Distrust was spreading faster than bullets. Luca intercepted Vittorio's forces inside the central hall. Gunfire erupted beneath towering marble columns. The battle was brutal and fast. Men who had served Luca for years felt protecting their king. The surviving guard gradually pushed the attackers backward. Then it happened. A trusted captain, standing only a few feet behind Luca, quietly raised his pistol. Not toward the enemy, toward Luca himself. Emma saw it first. Without thinking, she ran. The shot exploded through the hole. Instead of striking Luca's heart, the bullet tore through Emma's shoulder as she shoved him aside. She collapsed onto the marble floor. Time seemed to stop. Luca stared at the blood spreading across her coat. For the first time in decades, the feared Mafia king forgot the battlefield, forgot strategy, forgot revenge. He knelt beside the woman whose life he had accidentally destroyed days earlier. His soldiers watched in stunned silence. The cold, untouchable Luca de Luca looked afraid. The traitorous captain tried to escape. He never reached the door. Luca rose slowly. His face held no rage, only absolute certainty. Within seconds, the traitor was surrounded. He dropped his weapon, desperately insisting Vittorio had promised him power, money, and control of half the empire. Luca didn't answer. Neither did his guards. For years they had followed orders because they feared him. Today they acted for another reason. They had seen Emma risk her life for the man who had kidnapped her. Something inside them had changed. The traitor was taken away to face justice from the very people he had betrayed. Doctors rushed Emma into surgery. The hours that followed became the longest of Luca's life. Outside the operating room, hardened captains stood silently. No one spoke. No one checked business reports. No one discussed revenge. The empire waited for the fate of an ordinary woman. As dawn broke, the surgeon finally emerged. The bullet missed her heart. "She'll survive." Relief swept through the hallway like a storm. Several guards quietly closed their eyes in gratitude. Lucas simply leaned against the wall. For the first time in years, he realized victory felt meaningless if there was no one left worth protecting. Emma regained consciousness 2 days later. She found Lucas sitting beside the window. He looked exhausted, perhaps for the first time in his adult life. Neither of them spoke immediately. Finally, Emma broke the silence. "You're still here. I said no one would harm you. You couldn't keep that promise." "No." He lowered his eyes. "I couldn't." Those 3 words carried more regret than any speech ever could. Emma looked around the room. "You blame yourself." "I do. And what will that change?" He had no answer. She smiled weakly despite the pain. "You can't rewrite yesterday. You decide tomorrow." Simple words, yet they shattered something inside him. Every decision of his life had been driven by the past. Every act of violence, every empire built, every enemy created. For the first time, someone had pointed him toward the future instead. Over the following months, change came slowly. Some expected Luca to respond with unprecedented brutality. Instead, he dismantled parts of the organization that profited from innocent lives. Human trafficking operations disappeared. Forced labor camps were shut down. Money once used to fuel endless revenge-financed hospitals, schools, and rehabilitation programs in neighborhoods long abandoned by both politicians and criminals. Not everyone approved. Several old allies deserted him. Others called him weak. He accepted their departure. Power, he finally understood, meant little if it existed only to spread suffering. Those who remained were no longer loyal merely because they feared him. They believed in the future he was trying to build. Vittorio Romano eventually found himself isolated. The corrupt officials who had supported him abandoned him when public investigations exposed years of financial crimes. Former allies turned against him, unwilling to die for a man who inspired only fear. He was arrested while attempting to flee the country with forged documents and hidden accounts. His empire collapsed without a final battle. It had rotted from the inside long before its enemies defeated it. Months later, Emma stood in the courtyard where armed guards had once watched her every step. Children now played among newly planted olive trees. Families visited freely. The castle no longer resembled a prison. It looked like the beginning of something entirely different. Luca joined her. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Sometimes silence carried more meaning than words. Years earlier, one mistaken kidnapping had ignited a bloody war. Now that same mistake had transformed an empire built on fear into one seeking redemption. The underworld would always remember Luca de Luca as one of the most powerful mafia bosses in Europe. But those who truly knew his story remembered something else. The strongest man in the criminal world wasn't changed by another gun. He was changed by the one innocent woman he was never supposed to kidnap. And if one act of unexpected compassion could transform a king, how many lives could it transform next?